Hi, I'm Dave Vickers and welcome to the Photo Show. Now this week was Nikon's 100th birthday, so happy birthday Nikon. And as part of their celebrations they made an announcement about a new camera. Now it wasn't an announcement about the launch of a new camera, it was an announcement about the development of a new camera. So we've got very little details on what's actually coming here. And what they've announced is the development of the Nikon D850, which will be the replacement for the Nikon D810, which was relaunched in 2014. Now, the D800 range has always been Nikon's full-frame, largest megapixel camera. The original D800 had a 36.3 megapixel sensor, and that was carried over in the D810 when that was launched in 2014. So we're looking at a camera which is going to be a large megapixel camera, even larger megapixel than the flagship D5. Now, Nikon have released very few details on the D850. We know it actually exists because they've released a very short video called Hercules Rising, which is showing an 8K time-lapse video shot on a Nikon D850. So we know the camera actually exists, and we know one of the possible features is going to be an 8K time-lapse feature. But apart from that, there's very few clues as to what this camera will actually be. There's a couple of leaked press shots, and some of them are showing that the prism on the top is slightly more sculptured than the original D810, and it looks like they've done away with the pop-up flash, which is something that Nikon have been doing on some of their higher range cameras anyway, so that's no surprise. But apart from that, we've got very few clues. Now, as I said, when the D810 was launched with a 36.3 megapixel sensor, that was the largest full-frame DSLR that was available on the market. But since that time, Sony have released the A7R II, which had a 42 megapixel sensor, and Canon have released the 5DS, which had a 50 megapixel sensor. So we're guessing that Nikon is going to probably push the megapixel rate on this camera up again, possibly to match those or to beat those. Now, I think personally they're probably going to go somewhere within the 45 to 50 megapixel range, but there are rumours out there that they're going to push it even further to 80 to 100 megapixel. I'm not so sure, because I'm not sure that there's that much of a mass market for an 80 to 100 megapixel sensor camera, and I think that would probably narrow down its appeal. So I'm guessing that somewhere between the 45 to 50 megapixel range will probably be where this camera sits, but until the specs are released, we have no clue. So with this lack of detail, what I've basically done is looked at what the competition have done and looked at previous Nikon models that have been released recently and put together what I am calling the Nikon D850 Guessifications. So what I've done here is put together a bunch of specifications which I think this camera will probably have. When it's actually released and we've got the full specs, I'll go back and we'll compare and we'll see how close I was as to what the actual camera does contain. So starting off with sensor, we know the D850 will be a full frame sensor. All of the D800 range have been full frame cameras, so it's going to be a full frame DSLR. Megapixel wise, I'm guessing it's going to be somewhere in the 45 to 50 megapixel range to bring it up with cameras like the Canon 5DS. But there are a lot of rumours out there that think that it could possibly be higher than that, possibly be somewhere between 80 to 100 megapixels. But as I said before, I think that would actually narrow the market down for this camera. So I'm guessing that the megapixel range is going to be between 45 and 50 megapixels. ISO range. Now, the Nikon D810 had an ISO range of ISO 64 to ISO 51200. And I can see that staying pretty similar. Personally, I'd like to see camera manufacturers, and especially Nikon with a camera like this, drop the lower native ISO. Drop it down to something like ISO 50. So you're starting to expand on the lower end of the ISO range rather than going up to the crazy high ISOs that a lot of the cameras are coming out with now. But let's stick with, I think the ISO range would be ISO 64 to ISO 51200, with it being expandable up to the crazy 1,006,400 that you're finding in the D5 and the D500. Shutter speed. Now, on cameras of this range, I'm expecting the maximum shutter speed on the D850 to be 1/8000th of a second. That's fairly standard across this range of cameras. I think it will probably shoot at around 10 frames per second. Bring it in line with something like the D500, but not competing fully with the 12 frames per second of the flagship D5. So I'm guessing maximum shutter speed 1/8000th of a second and shooting at 10 frames per second. Autofocus. Now, following what Nikon have done with a lot of cameras recently, I think they're actually going to bring the autofocus that they use in the D5 and the D500 into the D850. So you're going to end up with 153 autofocus points, 99 of which will be cross type. That's just something that I think Nikon have been doing recently, is they're using systems from other models and bringing them in. So I think the autofocus will be the same as the D5 and the D500, so 153 autofocus points, 99 of which will be cross-type. Viewfinder, it's a DSLR camera, so it's going to have an optical viewfinder, and a camera in this range, I'm expecting 100% viewfinder coverage, which will be perfectly normal for this type of camera. On the back, I can see Nikon adding their tilting touchscreen, the same touchscreen that they've put on the D500 and the D7500. I can see them adding that to the D850 as an addition over the fixed screen that was on the D810. Storage wise, with the D850 being a huge megapixel camera, it's going to need a lot of storage, so I'm going to say it's going to have two storage card slots, one SD and one XQD card. So we're using one SD card, one XQD card, which would then handle the large file sizes from this camera. Video wise, the one thing we do know about the D850 is that it will probably have an 8K time-lapse feature, but time-lapses are made up of individual still frames anyway, and a 16 to 20 megapixel camera would easily be able to produce an 8K time-lapse. I think the D850 will have 4K, but in line with a lot of the other Nikon cameras that shoot 4K, I don't expect it to use the full frame of the sensor. I think it will use the central area of the sensor, introducing a crop factor to your lenses when you're shooting 4K video. But I do think the D850 will have 4K video. So there we go. Without any more information from Nikon, that's kind of the best guess I can come up with. What I've done is I've looked at the competition and I've looked at what Nikon have done with previous camera releases recently, and put together a list of what I think the D850 will contain. It'd be really interesting when the specs are actually released to go back over this list and have a look and just see how close we were. But for now, I'm Dave Vickers, this is The Photo Show, thanks for watching, see you next time.